Okay, class, this is your U.S. history lesson for Monday. I wanted to touch on some stuff real quick. Still way too many documents of the week missing. Way too many. When you get assigned something on a Monday and usually have all the way till Friday to do, it's just too easy of points to just give up. So make sure you get those in. If just know that you will regret if you do not pass the class because you couldn't get something done that you had a whole week to do. But on that note, this week it's a little bit less time. We do not have school on Friday. So when we don't have school on Friday planned like this, the document of the week is due by Thursday. So this week, your document of the week is due by the start of your class on Thursday, okay? So you have even one less day to do it. But today is not going to be the longest lecture in the world, so make sure you do that document of the week. So I'm making this a video where I'm in it a little bit more because I wanted to maybe show you a few examples or have a little bit more face-to-face. I tried to use a tripod and camera, but it came out all glitchy, so we're going to stick with the tried and true laptop. But I'm going to start off by sharing your document of the week assignment for this week, if it'll let me, which it doesn't want to let me, but that's okay. We know how to fool it. There are two different, there are two different document of the week assignments, depending on whether or not you're honors or non-honors. So if you are in first, fourth, or seventh, your document of the week is going to be this one. It's direct quotes from the Federalist Papers. And so, I don't know how that highlighted. That's going to be in there. It's very similar to last week. I'm giving you the document. So you're going to put your name at the top. And you're going to do this in classwork. If you have to go back a week or two to those videos where I showed you again how to turn it in, you certainly can. And you're going to list your source. And you're just going to say the Federalist Papers or various quotes from the Federalist Papers. That's your source this week. And you don't have to list them all. You can just give me a summary of one or several of them as long as it's 3 complete sentences for your summary. Then give me your opinion about what you read. Your opinion can be partially explaining why you don't totally understand it, but it has to be 3 sentences minimum. And then your challenge, whenever I give you a document of the week, just like I did last week, you tell me if it's primary or secondary and why. Now, if you are in my honors class, you've got a different one. So it's the same concept, but you have, let's see if it'll pop up here, you have the Anti-Federalist Papers. Now, if you're in first, fourth, or seventh, you don't have to worry about this, but if you're in third period, you have the same assignment, but with the Anti-Federalist Papers. So you are just going to focus on one, or you could talk about both of them collectively, but your name goes in the upper right-hand corner. It's the Anti-Federalist Papers, and you are going to give me a summary, an opinion, and your challenge is it primary or secondary, and why? Okay, so that is due by the start of class on Friday. All right, let's get back to the notes. So actually, the first thing I want to do is review the formative from last week. Now, I'm not going to grade the worksheet yet because there's a few people that have some unique circumstances that I'm going to give them a little bit of time to turn that in. But you should see your grade in progress book soon. So sample notes, sample questions from the notes so far. So this was the formative, and this wasn't graded, but it gives you an idea. It's the sort of thing that I'm going to ask you. Which state was created by the Northwest Ordinance? Of those choices, the only one that's valid is Michigan. Okay, so it's Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Since none of these are, only one of those is that state that I mentioned, your answer is Michigan. James Madison gets primary credit for the Constitution, just as who gets credit for the Declaration of Independence? Even though neither worked alone, we give primary credit for the Declaration to Thomas Jefferson. Okay. Which document supports the creation of public schools? I know this is on every version of the test. It's just a very straightforward question I can ask. The only one that mentions public schools in any way, shape, or form is the Northwest Ordinance, because it talks about how a portion of every township is dedicated to school. And then last question, let's see. What are some of the concerns of the Anti-Federalists? Did the Federalists offer any answers? There's a couple different things you could put here. I think the easiest one, I think the most prominent one, is the Anti-Federalists were very concerned their rights weren't listed. So what did they do? The Federalists said, how about a Bill of Rights? And that's actually what we're going to start with today. Now, I will say I don't know if you're going to be able to see all of these screens as I change them. So I might even go back through and share it separately. But there are several notes that I used to give, pages and pages of notes on the Constitution itself. And all this is real small now because you don't have to worry about it. We're skipping it all. People used to have to know the articles and what every article stood for. Article 1 talks about the legislative branch and all these details. And Article 2, same thing. They had to know how old you had to be a senator, to be in the House. Now, under the new Ohio standards, that's all government stuff. But we do need to know, and what I think is probably the most important thing that any citizen needs to know, is basically your rights, your amendments, and your Bill of Rights. So I have to go back around to make sure you can see that page properly. But let's share these notes again and look at your amendments. Okay, so we are going to take notes, and really this is the rest of the notes for this unit. We are going to look at all the amendments to the Constitution. So you get to skip the body of the Constitution. You get to skip the 4,300, I forget how many words it is. I know it hurt. The tattoo, I don't know if anybody remembers that reference. It's a true story. You can ask Talbot. Saw me at the beach one day. But anyway, that sort of just lays out the basics. But really, for you and I, our rights are listed very purposely in the Bill of Rights. Now, we're going to go over all 27 amendments eventually. And all of them are important, but some are pretty cut and dry. Some of the ones towards the end in particular, the 27th Amendment is a little boring, and it's just specific, cut and dry. 27th Amendment says Congress can't give itself a raise in its own pay session. Okay, those will go fast. The Bill of Rights take a little bit longer. There's a lot of nuance to it. As a matter of fact, today, we're only going to do one amendment. And if you think that's moving slow, I'll tell you that if you go to law school, you can have a whole class for one semester on just one amendment, and it's not uncommon at all. So there are 27 amendments to the Constitution, but within the Constitution, the very first 10 were all added at the same time, and we call those collectively the Bill of Rights. And we are going to focus today exclusively on the First Amendment. So let's talk a little bit about the First Amendment. People misunderstand this all the time. So there's certain things I want you to remember when it comes to the First Amendment, or really any amendment. And that is the idea that everyone has their freedoms, but those freedoms only extend in a way as far as your arm. Now, this is metaphorically, okay? There was a famous Supreme Court decision where the gentleman, Justice Hugo Black, I think, said, you have the right to swing your arm. That's your right, but that right stops at the tip of the next person's nose. So in other words, there's a limit. Because if you didn't have some limits on your right, if your rights were 100% unlimited, nobody would have any rights. That gets confusing, but your exercising of your rights can't interfere with other people exercising their rights. So we'll get into that, some of the specifics, but the First Amendment is packed with more rights than, especially at the time, than most countries had altogether. So there's a lot in there. And there's one that I even left off. You're allowed to, it's freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and to redress grievances. In other words, to, petition for change and complain, which is fine. I just think that sort of fits in a little bit with speech. So I'm going to focus on religion, speech, press, and assembly. All of your limits can be described as sort of swinging the arm. So I'm gonna go out of order. I'm gonna start with speech, okay? And I could keep it on this, I think. Okay, so you have freedom of speech. I have freedom of speech. Technically, you don't. Your parents possess it for you, but as soon as you're 18, you have it. Don't worry about it. Okay. Let's say 10 years from now, you're clearly an adult. You're 25 years old, and you run into me at Cedar Point, okay? Freedom of speech. Can you cuss me out and not have anything bad happen to you? I mean, you're 25, you're grown, you're out of school. It's tricky because in a technical sense, if you're yelling profanity, you could be disturbing the peace, you could be verbally assaulting me. So that's where the government, and by the way, who gets to judge or interpret this? The judicial branch, the judges. They're probably going to judge or interpret that as your freedom of speech going and hitting the tip of my nose. You're going too far. Bleep, bleep you. I hate your bleeping class. You're a bleep, bleep. You know, all of that stuff. That's going too far. And by the way, the same goes for me. I can't say the same to you. But you do have the right to freedom of speech up to that point. And by the way, you get to say it, but you're going to have consequences. You might get arrested. Okay, now let's switch it up a little bit. Who do I want to pick on? I don't know. Let's randomly pick a class. I opened up to third period. Oh, this seems like something Anisha would do. So we'll say Anisha. Okay, so my third period, Anisha is the student we're going to focus on and say 10 years from now, she sees me at Cedar Point. She's 25. She's grown. She has all of her rights. Her parents don't technically possess them for her. And she says, oh, Mr. Penrose, I had you in history 10 years ago. I just wanted you to know that I despised your class. I found you to be boring, dumb, ugly. I hope you have a miserable rest of your life and that Mrs. P leaves you good day and walks away. Wow. Wow. That was really, really hurtful. But it's within her freedom of speech. She didn't commit verbal assault. She didn't say bleep, bleep this. She didn't threaten my life. She didn't do anything. She didn't do anything nice, but it's legal. That's freedom of speech. There has to be a limit. She has a lot of room in there. But if she comes up to me firing bleep, bleep you, now all of a sudden you're making a scene at Cedar Point and it's no good. Or, you know, you can plug this in anywhere. So that's where that line is drawn. You can absolutely say things like that. And by the way, I could say back to her, oh yeah, well, I don't know. I can't think of anything mean to say to her. Well, you're not very nice. And you know, I could say that back. But if I start cussing and all this other stuff, now it's back on me. I don't have that freedom of speech. That's what's tricky for people to figure out. Another thing, another example, freedom of speech. The very famous example they used to give is that you have freedom of speech, but you can't run into a crowded room, a crowded movie theater and scream fire just because you think it's funny to watch everybody run out. You're going to get arrested for that. You have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom to just induce panic. There's a line. And again, you and I might disagree on that line. It really doesn't matter what either one of us thinks. It matters what the court, they get to judge or interpret where that line is. And you can even appeal that all the way up to the Supreme Court if they care to hear it. But that's how that works. For that matter, if you want to say something about either the president or somebody running for president, you could say, I really don't like him and I really this, and you could say all kinds of reasonable things for or against them and you're good. Don't threaten them. Do not threaten them. That's going over the line. That is going over the line. We are lucky, and there was a time when it was incredibly rare. It's just not, it's less rare today, thankfully, but we live in a country where we have the freedom to say, boy, I hope this person gets elected out of office, or I hope this person does or doesn't win. We have the freedom to say that, and the police don't throw us in jail for it. But you can't say something that is a direct threat. I don't even want to say it because it's recorded, and then you guys will cut it up and then send it to the president, and then I'm in big trouble. But you can't do anything that is a direct threat. So that's where your freedom of speech is limited and stops. I gave you an example early on, and I said, what if I work for a car dealership in Pittsburgh? I'm from Sandusky, Norwalk, that area, which is loosely the Cleveland area. I'm a Cleveland fan. And so I'm working for this car dealership in Pittsburgh, and I'm wearing a Cleveland Browns tie. Can my boss make me take that off, or do I have freedom of speech to express my support for the Browns? Well, this one is going to bother some people, but I have the right to wear it, but I might get fired for wearing it. Meaning the Constitution will protect me from going to jail for wearing that tie. But it doesn't mean there are no other consequences. I might get fired because my boss can reasonably say, hey, we're in downtown Pittsburgh. Our car dealership is, has a lot of sponsorships based on the team. We can't have somebody working for this dealership wearing a Cleveland Browns tie in downtown Pittsburgh. You can't wear that here. You can wear it after work, But if you wear it here, you're fired. They can fire me, and that's legal. I'm not losing my freedom of speech. I'm losing my job. I'm not losing my freedom of speech. My freedom of speech is still there. The consequence in terms of the Constitution cannot be jail. It cannot be the government coming in and punishing you for that. I hope that makes sense. Here, I think you've got this note, and we're going to come back to some other examples of that. But, you know, if I wear, okay, so by the way, you're going to see the same outfit a couple days in a row because I'm going to record several videos on the same day because I have to be gone to help move one of my kids. So don't just think I'm a weirdo wearing the same clothes. But let's say this, I think the shirt underneath this says Sandusky. This is just a blue Nike pullover. But let's say it said, I hate Mr. Talbot, okay? Mr. Talbot could come, now I haven't made any threatening statements and I haven't, it's nothing too far over the line for the police to care. But when I come into work and I wear this sweatshirt that says, I hate Mr. Talbot, or Dr. Sanders, or any Mr. Peugeot, or any one of my bosses is totally within their right to say, you have to take that off. That says you hate the principal of the school, and you can go, freedom of speech, I'm allowed to wear it. They can go, yeah, I mean, yeah, you won't go to jail for wearing it, but you won't be working here if you wear it. Does that make sense? You don't have, you know, if you take that too far, you could say, oh, if I'm a waiter, I can just cuss out all my customers. Well, your boss is going to fire you. You go, well, I have freedom of speech. There's a limit. There's a limit in how far it goes. Listen, it's very important, but you can't just say it's all, okay, it's just all encompassing and all knowing. All right, the other example I'm going to give you is in regards to freedom of religion. I'm looking for, okay, so the example I always give when we talk about freedom of religion is essentially, and again, this is very similar to freedom of speech. You have freedom of religion, but it has its limits. Okay, we have an arm swinging. So I'll see if I can move this camera so you can see. But am I right? Over there. See it right? Oh. Right up there. Below that sitting on that. And it's sitting up there because I joke with all of my classes and they say, am I allowed to worship a highlighter under the First Amendment? Am I allowed to worship a highlighter? Sure. My First Amendment right, freedom of religion. Can I make a shrine to a highlighter? Sure. Does it make me weird? Probably. But am I allowed? Absolutely. It's my freedom of religion. Am I allowed to say that the highlighter is the true religion and everybody should belong to it? Sure, I can say that. I can say that to as many people who will listen. Can I even knock on your door and say, have you heard about the power of the highlighter? Sure can. Now, if you open up your door and you see it's me and I have a highlighter and say, have you heard about the power of the highlighter? And you say, no thanks, I'm comfortable with my own religion. And you start to close the door and then I push through the door. Now I have hit your nose. I've gone too far. I'm allowed to knock on the door, unless you have a no soliciting sign. I'm allowed to knock on the door and say, highlighter, but I can't kick through the door. That's going too far. I'll take it even further. Am I allowed to believe that the highlighter talks to me? Yes. By the way, if I really believe this though, would it maybe get me in trouble with Mr. Talbot because I'd be the crazy teacher that says highlighters talk to him? Maybe. Okay. Can I believe that the highlighter talks to me? Yes. Can I believe that the highlighter says that it needs human sacrifice? I can believe it. Can I say, and it has chosen that person and then go after that person? No, absolutely not. That is where the Supreme Court says, oh, line, you're touching the nose of the next person. Does that make sense? I wish you were here in front of me so I could find out. Let me give you a real religion instead of a fake highlighter religion so you understand. There is a very, we'll say a church that has a lot of notoriety in West Virginia where part of their religious ceremony is handling live rattlesnakes. And essentially the belief system within this church is that as you handle these live rattlesnakes, If you have not repented or lived in a right way, the snake will bite you. And whether you live or die is in God's hands. Are you allowed to believe in that? Supreme Court kind of came down on it as saying, essentially, you can, as long as you're an adult. If you're an adult, that's fine, but you can't put kids there. Kids, that's a different spot. We don't want to endanger children, but if you want to endanger yourself, that's your right. Eventually, there were some local decisions that made it tougher, and really it was based on the idea that these ambulances had to make these runs up these like rural roads that were hard to get to, saving people all the time. So I think there's some limitations there. Now, they can believe it all day long, but the practicing, I think the last time I heard a court ruling on that is, no, it's gone too far. These, again, are just all examples within the First Amendment. And there's just a million different things like this. Assembly. Actually, let me go back to press. How about freedom of the press? Can the press print anything they can prove to be true? Mostly. Well, first off, freedom of press, you can't knowingly print a lie. If you just know something is a lie, you're not supposed to print it. If you believe it to be true, though, you can print it. There are some exceptions. There's a reporter who is now on Fox News, I believe. He used to have his own TV show by the name of Geraldo Rivera. And Geraldo Rivera, during the first Persian Gulf War, so way back in '91, he was embedded with some troops. I think it's the first. It could have been the second, but either way, he was embedded with some troops. And meaning he was reporting with troops, and he said, hey, we're about to go on this secret mission, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And he just starts drawing in the sand, and he kind of lays out their plan. And that's insane. He got pulled right away. He lost his press credentials. Now, you could say, well, he was reporting the truth. Well, in that particular case, you can't report that because it put our troops in danger at that moment. So there are limits. You can't print something, like, oh, hey, nobody knows this, but there's a secret military base right over here. You could be put on limitations for that because it could put U.S. soldiers' lives in danger. I think where that finger hit, where your hand hits the nose is pretty clear there. Assembly is an interesting one because it's come up so much recently. You have the right to assemble, to peaceably assemble. So and again, there could be exceptions. I didn't even think about this when I started teaching this. What about COVID? They've put limits on how many people can gather because of COVID. That's reasonable because there's a health concern. Let's take that out of the way. When COVID is over, can I have 30 history teachers over to my house and have a history party? Sure can. Is there at any point when that assembly of people becomes unconstitutional? Maybe if we get too loud, maybe if we get too crazy, maybe if we start something in the street that spills out over into other people's houses and yards, then it can be. So let's look at something much more realistic than a giant history teacher party. Assembly, in terms of protest. There have been protests all over the country. Sandusky had at least one, maybe two different marches and protests that I can think of off the top of my head, and those were totally within the rights of the law. The assembled protesters followed reasonable protocol. I believe they got permits. If they didn't get permits, I know that they had sort of coordinated with the police and said, hey, we're going to go from here to here, and they did. And you're fine. That is your American right, First Amendment right, listed right there, to assemble. Some of the protests, Portland comes to mind, if it reaches the point where some of the protesters are destroying public property, that's when the authorities can say, okay, this has to stop. This thing here has to stop, or we're breaking up this group. Now, it's not lost on me that there's some controversy about whether or not people have drawn the line too early. Ultimately, if there's a disagreement and you say that police department tried to stop this reasonable assembly too early, it wasn't as nearly as bad as they said it was. Ultimately, who would judge or interpret whether or not my First Amendment rights to assemble were broken? The judicial branch, a judge. That's who gets to decide that. That's who, not the president, not even the police. Ultimately, the people who will judge or interpret whether or not that line's been crossed, whether or not your nose has been hit by the swinging of my hand, will be the judicial branch. So I hope that makes sense. That's a lot of stuff I'm throwing at you. But I mean, it's all going to follow that same basic concept. You have freedoms. Those freedoms all have limits. If they didn't have limits, would anybody really have any freedom? Because remember, you're just going off these. If we had complete freedom of religion, you could believe and do whatever you want in the name of religion. Well, then I could say, oh, the highlighter says that I'm going to kill Bob and Fred. What happened to Bob and Fred's rights to, not get murdered by a weirdo who believes in highlighters? All rights have their limits. I think most of us can agree on where a lot of those limits are, but for the times we can't, it's not my opinion that counts. It's not your opinion that counts until you're a judge. It's a judge's opinion. They get to judge or interpret where that line is. Hope that makes sense. Tomorrow, we are going to deal with amendments 2 through 4, and I really enjoy talking about those. There's a lot of real life stuff going on in those amendments as well. Okay, hope everybody has a great day. Get your document of the week done. Just do it and get it out of the way. It's due Thursday. Just be done with it. All right, everybody. Have a great day.